He thought he'd found a coconut in the garden, but it was actually his own mother's head. It was January 1993 in Jacksonville in Florida. Out of the blue, a 24-year-old mum vanished. Bonnie Heim was an amazing mum, and she had an adorable little 3-year-old boy called Aaron. Now, Bonnie would do absolutely anything for her child. He really was her world, which is why it made no sense for her to completely vanish out of the blue. She would never have just left of her own accord. At the time of her disappearance, she had a husband called Michael, and the pair worked for his auntie Evan. In order to work out exactly what happened, we need to rewind to the night before she vanished. She'd got home at 7:30 that night, but then rang Evan in floods of tears. She'd got plans with Evan that evening, but on the phone she was like, "I'm so sorry, me and Michael got into a huge argument and I'm just not feeling up to it." The day after, it seemed like she also wasn't feeling so good because Michael randomly called into work for her and said, "She's left, she's not going to be in today." But if she'd left of her own accord and she was going somewhere, why was her purse, her bank card, her ID all in a rubbish bin? So Michael called police when he heard about this, and he was very calm on the phone. Again, he repeated his story. He said, "Yep, we had an argument and she just up and left." He said she disappeared out into the night after we argued. He said his mum popped over to take care of baby Aaron while he went to look for her for 45 minutes. No one really knows for sure what he did in that 45 minutes. Then Bonnie's car showed up, and it was actually parked near to an airport, but how could she have got a plane anywhere without any money, any ID? Weirdly, the driver's seat was also pushed quite far back, further back than Bonnie would have normally had it. Why would she have her driver's seat pushed so far back? Police also found a shoe print in the car, and it matched the exact size and style of shoe that Michael wore. But does that really mean anything? I mean, I'm sure that we probably all have had our feet in our shoes in our partner's cars at some point. This just wasn't enough to prove that foul play was involved. Heartbreakingly, little Aaron drew a picture for a child psychologist, and it was harrowing. This 3-year-old boy must have seen something horrific because there's no way he would have dreamt this up. The drawing showed his dad killing his mum, and in his own little voice, in his own childlike little way, he explained that he'd been taken with the dad to dispose of the mum's body. And people all started coming out of the woodwork saying like, yeah, Michael was a really abusive husband. He'd once even slammed Bonnie's fingers in the car door on purpose. But still, they didn't have enough evidence to convict him with a crime, which obviously is infuriating. A little Aaron was put into foster care, and because he was so disturbed with the events that he had seen as a child, he actually started sleeping with a brick under his pillow. But everything was about to change. Aaron grew older, and he just knew in his heart of hearts that his dad had something to do with his mum's death. He wasn't going to let it go. He actually decided to sue his dad for wrongful death, and he won the case. This is a civil case, not a criminal case, so it's actually a lot easier to get a win, if that makes sense. You don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt like you do in a criminal court. So the dad had to pay Aaron a lot of money, and part of that was giving him his childhood home. By this point, the dad had sort of been renting this out to various different people, but it was now Aaron's. It belonged to him. And this was going to really put the nail in the coffin for Michael. Aaron decided to renovate the garden, and one day he was digging and digging and found something. Something was buried inside a bag, and at first Aaron thought it must have been a coconut. Then he saw teeth. It was the top portion of his mum's skull. Finally, in 2015, Michael was arrested and charged with murder. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison.
This hotel manager was beheaded in front of his family, all because of a broken washing machine. On September 10th of 2025, at the Downtown Suites Motel in Dallas, Texas, 50-year-old Chandra Nagamalai was doing his job per usual. He was a devoted husband and father and worked at this motel as a manager. Everything was going pretty well that morning until 37-year-old Jordanis Cobos Martinez became angry with him. The confrontation started over something small, a broken washing machine, and Chandra told Jordanis that he wasn't allowed to use it. Not only did this make Jordanis upset, but he was also upset because Chandra was talking to an employee to translate for him and wasn't speaking to him directly. What started as a simple argument spiraled into something unimaginable. Surveillance footage showed Jordanis leaving the room and coming back with a machete. He suddenly attacked Chandra, and Chandra desperately tried to run towards the office where his wife and son were, but that's when Jordanis chased him down. Right in front of Chandra's family, Jordanis decapitated him in the parking lot. Then Jordanis kicked the severed head in the parking lot, picked it up, and then threw it in the dumpster. Not only that, but Jordanis took Chandra's cell phone and key card during the attack. Once police arrived, Jordanis was found covered in blood, still holding the machete. Jordanis was taken to the police station to be interrogated, and he admitted to everything. It was revealed that Jordanis had a criminal past in Florida, California, and Texas. In Florida of 2017, he was arrested for stealing a car. In California that same year, he committed a carjacking while under the influence, and he was found naked. In Houston, Texas, he faced indecency charges with a 14-year-old girl and assault. Indecency charges were dropped in 2023 for lack of evidence, but he still served a year in prison for the assault. Jordanis is originally from Cuba, and he was released from ICE custody due to an order of supervision because Cuba didn't want to take him back because of his record. Right now, Jordanis is in Dallas County Jail facing a capital murder, which in Texas could mean life without parole or the death penalty.
I can't get this image out of my head, and if you've seen what happens next, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Genuinely gave me nightmares for weeks. I can't believe they showed it on TV. It was August 2003 in Erie in Pennsylvania. An order came into the local pizzeria for 2 small pizzas, but this was no ordinary pizza order. The delivery location was just a few kilometers away from the pizzeria, so although Brian Wells was about to finish his shift, he was like, okay, I'll just quickly do this one last drop-off before I go home. He'd worked there for 10 years, so he's very used to doing just like little drop-offs just before he ended his shift. No one could have ever guessed the horror that was about to unfold. Now, he drove over there and got out of his car. The next time he was seen was more horrifying than you could ever imagine. Brian walked into a local bank with a boom strapped around his neck. He was clutching 2 pages of instructions with details of how to rob this bank and a weird kind of treasure hunt. He handed a note over to the terrified clerk, basically demanding cash. The note said that he required $250,000, but she didn't have that much. It said if she didn't hand it over, his neck would explode. Now, shaking, she handed over all the money she had access to, which was only $8,000, which I know is a lot, but obviously nothing compared to what he was asking for. The commotion at the bank alerted police, who raced over there and tracked Brian down, who by this point was in a public car park. And they managed to get to Brian and handcuff him, but the guy was a walking explosive device. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think that handcuffing him is going to solve the problem here. And soon these dramatic scenes were being broadcast in every single person's house across the country, live on TV. What the hell was about to happen? He was begging and pleading, please get this thing off me, I'm going to die. And everybody just stood back, watching and waiting. There was this eerie silence when everybody was just anticipating what was about to happen next. And then 8 minutes later, the device suddenly exploded. He was killed instantly. And honestly, I can't believe that you can actually watch this footage. But the danger was far from over, because obviously some kind of maniac had done this to Brian and they were still on the loose and the clock was ticking. So police grabbed the instructions that Brian had been holding and suddenly just uncovered this bizarre scavenger hunt. Scrawled at the bottom of the instructions was a terrifying warning. It said, act now, think later, or you will die. There was a list of tasks that he had to complete, so police started on doing these tasks and following the hunt. And maybe I'm overthinking here, but I would definitely be paranoid that this was some kind of trap. The trail actually led them back to that original delivery location, and right there was a jar, but the jar was empty. So police were stumped until a few weeks later when they got a call. A man called Brian Rothstein rang up to say, there is a dead man in my freezer. What the hell was going on in this town? He had no issue explaining to police exactly who had done this. He said, my ex Marjorie shot this guy who was her boyfriend called James. It was like, she forced me to go along with this. She forced me to help her tidy this all up and cover it up, but now I am out. I don't want to hide this anymore. And police noticed something extremely interesting. This house that they'd gone to was actually very, very close to the delivery location with the whole pizza situation. Then things kind of started to unravel. Another man came forward called Kenneth Barnes. He said, I know this Marjorie woman and she is evil. He said she was the one who planned this whole pizza delivery device thing. But here's the really controversial part. He claimed Brian was in on it. Brian, who'd had the device strapped around his neck, Brian that was now dead. He He claimed that he'd even had his neck measured prior to this whole thing to make sure that it fit. By the way, another random controversial fact is the fact that this man is only 46. Some witnesses also came forward to say that they swear that they heard Brian talking about a bank robbery before he actually did it. And some people wonder maybe Brian didn't actually realise that this was going to be a real device around his neck. Maybe he thought that it was going to be sort of staged. Maybe the most controversial and shocking part of this whole case is that 7 people were in on it. All 7 of these did actually end up dying from various things. This was a while ago now, but some did give evidence against Marjorie and basically said she was this evil mastermind. She was convicted of armed bank robbery, conspiracy to commit armed bank robbery, and use of a destructive device in a crime, and she got life in prison. And also she was obviously done for the murder of James. She is 100% certain Brian was involved with this. He signed up. But do we trust her? What could his motive even have been? Some believe that Bill Rothstein was also the mastermind behind this scavenger hunt, but he passed away before he could even undergo a trial.
This pregnant 19-year-old was lured into a home and her baby was cut from her womb. Madeleine Ochoa Lopez was born on November 16th of 1999 and lived in Chicago, Illinois with her husband and family. In 2019, she was pregnant with her second child and she had joined a Facebook group called Help a Sister Out. Ultimately, this group was for mothers or expecting mothers selling baby clothes/items, or they could trade things with each other. Madeleine was looking for a double stroller for her toddler and for her baby that was going to be born soon. At the time, Madeleine didn't have a job, so she was hoping that she'd be able to find this stroller at a much cheaper price than going in store and buying it brand new. When Madeleine had made this post about looking for a stroller, 46-year-old Clarissa Figueroa commented on her post saying that she had some brand new baby clothes as well as unused items for her. The two then set up a time for Madeleine to pick up these items, but she had no idea that this was going to be a trap. On April 23rd of 2019, Madeleine went to Clarissa's home to pick up these baby items. When she went to the door, 24-year-old Desiree Figueroa opened the door, who is Clarissa's daughter. Once she was inside, Desiree was showing her a photo album to distract her, while Clarissa went behind Madeleine and used a wire to strangle her. Clarissa then went on top of Madeleine and strangled her for 4 to 5 minutes. Once Madeleine had died, Clarissa and Desiree cut her baby from her body. Clarissa then called 911 and told the operator that she had just given birth and that the baby wasn't breathing. Clarissa and the baby were both hospitalized, but medical staff noticed that Clarissa wasn't giving any signs that she had just given birth, which was pretty suspicious. The day that Madeleine was unalive, she was supposed to pick up her 3-year-old from daycare, but she never showed up. Her husband tried to report her as missing, but they told him to come back in 72 hours. For weeks, Madeleine's family searched desperately and pleaded with the community for help. On May 14th, detectives found Madeleine's car parked near Clarissa's home. They began to search the property, and that's when they found Madeleine's body in a garbage can in the backyard covered with yard waste. Clarissa, Desiree, and Clarissa's boyfriend were all arrested. In June, Clarissa was sentenced to 50 years, Desiree 30 years, and Clarissa's boyfriend was sentenced to 4 years. As for Madeleine's baby, he fought for his life for 2 months but tragically passed away.
Well, that rapper has just been sentenced to 30 years behind bars after killing his own cousin. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of Frederick Rooks. In January 2021, police in Decatur, Georgia were responding to a 911 call reporting that there had been a shooting. When the officers arrived at the scene, they would discover a man who was extensively bleeding. He had been shot several times in his head and also in his leg. 10 shell casings would be found surrounding his body. This man would be identified as 34-year-old Frederick Rooks, who sadly succumbed to his injuries, being pronounced dead at the scene. Witnesses reported that Frederick had been seen getting out of a white BMW, and this same white BMW was caught on CCTV camera fleeing from the scene shortly after the shooting. When speaking to the family, they would reveal that the driver of that BMW was 23-year-old Ricky Lamar Hawk, also known as rapper Silento, the artist behind the hit song Watch Me Whip, Watch Me Nay Nay, which absolutely blew up his career. Ricky would be arrested, and just under 2 weeks later, he would confess to the killing. The evidence against him began to pile up, including his car, and the shell casings that were recovered from the scene matched a gun that was on Ricky when he was arrested. Ricky would accept a plea deal, pleading guilty but mentally ill to several criminal charges including voluntary manslaughter, aggravated assault, possessing a gun while committing a crime, and concealing the death of another. Because he pleaded guilty to all of those, the murder charge against him was dropped. He was handed a sentence of 30 years imprisonment, and even now after his sentence, we have no idea why he decided to gun down his own cousin.
He was a serial killer who started when he was only 13 years old and then went pretty much uncaught for over 30 years. This is one of those terrifying cases where someone has no idea who they're actually married to. Charlie Brandt grew up with his father Herbert, his mother Ilsa, and then his 3 sisters. Charlie's relationship with his father was definitely less than perfect. He did not think that his son was manly enough, and apparently Charlie wasn't allowed to show any emotion around his father. Everything came to a boiling point when Charlie's father shot and unalived his dog right in front of him. And this dog was Charlie's best friend, and Charlie was only 13 years old, and he had just witnessed this terrible thing happen right in front of him to his best friend. And after that, something changed in Charlie. It was like a switch went off. Because only 1 week later, Charlie went into his father's nightstand, took out one of his father's weapons, and opened fire on both of his parents. And it's even more devastating because Charlie's mother, Ilsa, was 8 months pregnant. And then when Charlie thought that both of his parents were gone, he went into his older sister Angela's room and attempted to unalive her as well. Luckily, Angela was able to outsmart and escape her brother, and miraculously, his father was still alive after being shot 3 times by his own son and was able to call 911. But tragically, the same could not be said for Charlie's mother, Ilsa, and her unborn child, because unfortunately both of them passed away. 13-year-old Charlie has just unalived his pregnant mom and tried to unalive his father and his sister as well. But it was determined by 2 psychiatrists that Charlie had no mental problems. And after only spending 1 year in a hospital, Charlie was released. Yeah, you heard that right. He spent only 1 year in a hospital receiving little to no mental treatment because they did not think he was mentally ill in the first place. And after Charlie was released, he just went back living with his dad and his siblings like nothing happened. Charlie's records were sealed to the public, and his dad banned any of the family members from ever talking about it again. And his sister Angela is obviously terrified of her brother, and they also had 2 other younger sisters who were only 2 and 3 years old at the time, and they grew up thinking that their mother passed away in a car accident. After that, Charlie went on to live a pretty normal life. He got married to this really nice woman named Terry, and Terry married Charlie never knowing that he had unalived his pregnant mom. That should be illegal. From the outside, Charlie and Terry were the perfect couple. People definitely envied the relationship that they had, but Charlie definitely had a lot of secrets and a lot of red flags. For one thing, it was pretty well known in Charlie's friend group that he had this really creepy obsession with his niece, Michelle Jones. Charlie would also make these really weird jokes to his friends about unaliving women and removing their hearts. I don't know in what world that would ever be considered funny. Only a couple years into Charlie and Terry's marriage, Terry confided in a friend that she thought her husband had unalived someone. And I know you're probably thinking that, oh, Terry found out about what he did to his mom, but you are so wrong because Terry is talking about someone completely different. A woman's body had been found only 4 blocks away from their home. Her had been removed, like those jokes he was making, and also Charlie came home late that night, and when he did come home, he came home covered in blood. For whatever reason, Terry ignored her gut feeling. She never went to the police about this. She never confronted her husband Charlie about this that we know of, and the 2 of them went on to be married for another 15 years. Which brings us to September of 2004. There's this terrible storm approaching, and the area that Charlie and Terry lived in was actually being evacuated because it was not safe. So their niece, Michelle, you remember Michelle, she's this great person. She offers her aunt and her uncle, Charlie and Terry, to come stay with her until their area where they lived was safe. But her uncle, Charlie, had a sinister plan and these sinister motives for this trip. On the 13th of September, Terry's loving husband brutally unalived her, And then Charlie went into his niece Michelle's room, attacked her, unalived her as well. He did some unspeakable things to her afterwards, and then moved her heart like he always joked about. He was obsessed with her for years, and then afterwards he unalived himself as well. When the investigators found this awful scene, they're so confused because Charlie's supposed to be this normal guy in this perfect marriage. How many times have we heard that before? They had no idea why this happened, why Charlie did this. And that's when his sister, Angela, was finally able to admit what Charlie did to her, her dad, and her pregnant mom so many years before. And this is actually when their two younger sisters, who remember were only 2 and 3 when this happened, they were in their late 30s now, and finally found out what actually happened to their mom. Could you even imagine being in your late 30s and realizing that everything you thought about your life and your family was a lie? Investigators started to think that there was probably no way that Charlie committed that crime when he was 13 and then 35 years later committed this crime. They were sure there had to be some more victims, so they actually started looking into cold cases with similar details, like hearts being removed, and they found 26 victims that could be linked to Charlie, including that woman that Terry suspected her husband had unalived, that woman from 15 years ago that was found 4 blocks away from their home. They were able to confirm that Charlie did do that. Michelle and Terry's families are rightfully furious that they were never made aware of who Charlie really was, and many people believe that when Terry married Charlie, she should have been made aware of his sealed records, but you're gonna have to let me know what you think about that. This case scares me so much because you can be married to someone for years and never know who they really are.
She was found melted to her couch after 12 years of neglect, all while living with her parents who did absolutely nothing while she slowly wasted away. Her name was Lacey Fletcher, and one morning her parents called 911 saying that Lacey was dead. When paramedics arrived to the house, the smell was so bad that they literally had to wear hazmat masks. And when they reached the living room, they saw something that made grown men throw up. She had been dead for 2 days, but her parents didn't say a word about it until now. When investigators questioned them, they said that she wanted to live like that and that she refused to get off the couch. But it turns out Lacey had severe autism. She was bullied so badly in high school that she had to be homeschooled. By her 20s, her body was shutting down and she couldn't walk or take care of herself. But instead of helping or getting her medical assistance, her parents just ignored her. They left her on that couch for 12 straight years. She wasn't bathed. She wasn't fed. She sat in the same position until her skin fused into the furniture. They didn't even bother to clean her after relieving herself. They would just throw towels over her and just leave for vacation. And here's what actually broke me. They found couch stuffing inside of her stomach, inside her fingernails, which means that she tried to eat her way out. But sadly, Lacey was so neglected on that couch that she died at 36 years old. When police arrested her parents, they showed zero remorse. They said that they weren't meant to be caregivers. They were sentenced to 40 years, but will probably only serve 20 if they show good behavior. That just makes no sense to me. Please be safe out there. It's just so cruel that
this is the youngest woman in America to ever be put on death row. Krista Pike. Wow, where do I even start? Krista was born with severe brain damage because her mother was drinking pretty heavily throughout her entire pregnancy, and Krista had a terrible childhood. I'm not even gonna lie. Her parents were neglectful and abusive. Krista was often bounced around from mom's house, dad's house, grandparents' house, and they all sucked. By the time that Krista was 15 years old, she had been essayed by multiple men, and this abuse started as early as when Krista was 2 years old, and one of these men even included their dog in the essay of 12-year-old Krista. By the time that Krista was 18 years old, she was a high school dropout. She spent some time in juvie, but she said that she wanted to turn her life around, so she joined Job Corps. If you're not familiar with what this was a government-funded program where troubled teens and early adults could live on this campus all together. They would finish their education, learn skills, so hopefully one day they could have a great career. But only after a few days on campus, Krista met 17-year-old Daryl Shipp, and they started this relationship. It was extremely toxic. Daryl was really into a lot of really weird, dark, creepy things, and this toxic, abusive relationship that they had completely distracted them from what they went to Job Corps to do, which was better their lives. Krista also started this feud, you could say, with another girl on campus, 19-year-old Colleen Schlemmer. Colleen was at Job Corps for all the right reasons. She really did want to better her life and have a great career one day with computers. That was her dream. extreme, but Colleen was sucked into this petty teenage drama by Krista. Krista was convinced that Colleen wanted her man to Daryl and that Colleen was obsessed with her man. But if anyone in this case is obsessed with anyone, Krista was obsessed with Colleen. She was always talking about her, how much she hated her. She was pretty much stalking her around campus, threatening her and bullying her all the time. And then one day in January of 1999, Krista goes up to Colleen and asks if they want to call a truce, and asked her if she actually wanted to hang out that night, kind of like a peace offering. So that night, 18-year-old Krista, her boyfriend, 17-year-old Daryl, and their friend, 18-year-old Shadola Peterson, all lured 19-year-old Colleen off of campus. And then once they were alone in this creepy part of the woods that was like off of a park, Daryl and Crystal attacked Colleen, while Shadola kind of stood back and was used as a lookout. This attack on Colleen lasted over 45 minutes and it was brutal. They were kicking her, beating her. They used a sharp weapon on her 300 times, and then they were dropping these big cement blocks on her until Colleen's skull was completely fractured. Krista even took a piece of the skull back to campus with her and was showing people and bragging to anyone that would listen about what she had just done. Krista has just unalived Colleen over jealousy over a boy, Daryl, that Krista had only known for 3 months. This was all over a 3-month-long relationship. And for some reason, all of these kids on campus that Krista is bragging to that she just unalived Colleen did not tell anyone until Colleen's body was found 2 days later. In police custody, all 3 of them were arrested, obviously, and they all made full confessions. And Krista was smiling the entire time, like she was totally pleased with herself. Since Shadola didn't actually have any physical involvement, technically, in the unaliving of Colleen, she walked away with only probation. Daryl, who was only 17 years old at the time, was sentenced to life in prison with possibility of parole in 2026, which is not that long away, but personally, I don't think there's any chance that they will let him out. And Krista, who was only 18 years old when she unalived Colleen, tried to blame her actions on her bad childhood. We hear that all the time. She was sentenced to death row and was the youngest woman in America to ever be sentenced to death. And Krista, who to this day has never shown any emotion or remorse for Colleen and Colleen's family, cried. She cried a lot. She bawled her eyes out when she found out that she was going to be sentenced to death. Krista also said that she did not think that she deserved to die, but Colleen did. Because you were insecure about your 3-month-long relationship? Like, girl, please. And to only further prove how heartless Krista is, only a few days after she was sentenced, she sent to Daryl this letter. I'll put part of it on the screen now so you can pause and read it, but it's disgusting, and you will see. There is not an official date set to unalive Krista, but there's been a lot of talk recently to actually set a date since this happened all the way back in 1995. So if you want updates on that, you can always follow me. I'm constantly updating on the cases that we cover. There has been some controversy. Some people believe that Krista at 18 years old was too young for her sentence. Also considering that Daryl was 17. So, you know, a year, actually only a few months younger than Krista. They received life in prison versus, you know, the death penalty. So why is 17 so different than 18? You can let me know what you think about that. Personally, I think that Krista is exactly where she should be. But that's completely my opinion, and I'm open to read all of your guys' opinions in the comments. I'm always reading my comments that you guys leave me. You guys always make up a lot of good points. You guys always have a lot of good, you know, points, thoughts, theories, questions, comments. So I love to read your guys' comments. So definitely let me know all your thoughts about this case, all of your opinions, and let me know what case you want to see me cover next. And I love you guys so much, and I'll see you tomorrow.
These American missionaries serving in Haiti were just shot and killed and then set on fire by a local gang. And unfortunately, they were on the phone with their families who heard the entire thing. This is Davy Lloyd and his wife Natalie, who just so happens to be the daughter of Missouri State Representative Ben Baker. The couple worked for Missions in Haiti, which is a missionary organization created by Davy's parents. Davy grew up in Haiti and loved the community there. He left when he was 18 to attend a Bible college and met Natalie, and the two got married in the summer of 2022 before returning back to Haiti to serve the children children there. But last Thursday at around 9 p.m., the couple as well as a group of children were leaving a youth group activity at the church when they were ambushed by 3 trucks full of men from a local gang. The gang tied Davy up in his house and beat him up. After they beat him up, they robbed the organization of literally everything they had, including their vehicles, and left. Some neighbors were able to get inside the house to untie Davy, who then called his mom. Davy was crying on the phone, scared for his life, and he told his mom that he and their compound were under attack. But just when things seemed like they were turning around, a second gang showed up and forced Davy, his wife, and the mission's local director, Jude Montes, into Davy's house and held them captive there for hours. During that time, the couple used a satellite internet link to make calls to their loved ones. They detailed every horrific thing that was happening to them, and all their loved ones could do was listen helplessly. This all took place in a community that is heavily controlled by gangs. Because of the heavy gang presence, police don't go in that area, so they were unable to get the missionaries out of the house. The head of the organization, which is Davy's parents, tried negotiating with the gang on the phone to release them in exchange for money, but it was of no use. The gang then fatally shot all 3 people before setting the house on fire and leaving, and unfortunately, there's reportedly a video circulating online of the crime scene that shows their bodies inside the house. According to Natalie's dad, Representative Ben Baker, the missions in Haiti previously managed to make friends with some of the gang members, who thought they were there for the right reasons. Davy and Natalie's bodies have since been taken to the US Embassy, but at this point, no one knows how the investigation will proceed since the area is so controlled by gangs, and the fact that police won't go in that community because of it. They also don't know 100% at this point which gang is responsible for the murders. According to the missionary organization, the couple loved living in Haiti and doing humanitarian work that focused on the children there. Even as the violence worsened there over the last few months, they reportedly refused to leave the children behind who would have nowhere to go. They were also known to use their joint Instagram account called Adventures in Haiti to document their life and work there.
He was the happiest prisoner on death row. This is a heartbreaking case that will reduce you to tears. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of Dorothy Drain and the major miscarriage of justice of Joe Arady. On the evening of the 14th of August 1936, the 3 Drain family children were sleeping soundly in their beds whilst home alone in Pueblo, Colorado. This was sisters Barbara and Dorothy and their younger brother. Sometime during the night, an intruder would make his way into the home through the front door, which had been left unlocked. He creeped up the stairs and made his way to Dorothy and Barbara's bedroom, where he launched a horrific frenzied attack on the 2 young girls. They would both be bludgeoned, repeatedly struck in the head with the blunt end of a hatchet, and the intruder would SA 15-year-old Dorothy, who heartbreakingly succumbed to her injuries, dying. Barbara clung on to life. Her injuries put her into a 2-week coma, but she came out of it and she actually survived. The murder of Dorothy Drain was the biggest case in Pueblo at the time, and police really felt under pressure to catch her killer and to get this case solved. In order to do this, they did some good old gumshoe detective work. They attended Dorothy's funeral and were keeping their eyes peeled for anyone that stood out or anyone that acted suspicious. They laser focused on one man specifically. This man came to the funeral dressed in his work clothes. He kept on pushing in the queue to look at Dorothy's body inside of her casket. He was repeatedly trying to give Dorothy's dad money. This man was Francisco Frank Aguilar, a 33-year-old man who had worked for Dorothy's dad for a short amount of time before he was sacked only days before the murder. When investigators searched his apartment, they were able to recover a hatchet which had markings on consistent with the wounds that had been left on both of the young girls. After his arrest, there were scrapings taken from underneath his fingernails. There were fibres found in these scrapings, and these fibres matched the bed sheets inside of Dorothy and Barbara's bedroom. The Pueblo police were confident that they had their man. They had caught Dorothy's killer when they received a phone call from a sheriff in Wyoming, notifying them that he had Dorothy's killer and his name was Joe Arady. Joe was born and raised in Pueblo, Colorado. From a young age, his parents, teachers and peers all began to notice that Joe was a little bit different. He had intellectual developmental issues issues, which meant that he couldn't do a lot of things. He was basically non-verbal, he couldn't read or write. He really struggled with communication and really understanding what other people were saying to him. Because of this, he found it very hard to develop relationships, and so in order to be liked, he would often go along with what everybody else was doing, not really understanding what he was doing. He was very vulnerable, very easily led, and just wanted to make people happy. All round, Joe was a young boy who was really struggling. After essentially being kicked out of his local school because they couldn't teach him, they couldn't accommodate for him, Joe would be sent to a state school over 300 miles away from his family. This school, however, was a school specifically for people with intellectual difficulties. While here, it was determined that Joe, who by now was 10-year-old, actually had the mind of a 6-year-old, and as the years went on, and as Joe physically got older, his mental age stayed exactly the same. At the school, Joe would spend a lot of his time alone, and in that time he would play with any toys that he could find. If he couldn't find any toys, he would just play with regular objects. He also enjoyed going out on walks. In August 1936, Joe and a couple of the other boys from the home all decided that they were going to run away. They jumped on the back of a train and let the train lead them wherever they were gonna go. I do believe that they were intending on coming back, however, for whatever reason, Joe managed to get separated from the rest of the group. For just over a week, he was missing, and even when he was found later, because of his lack of understanding, he wasn't able to say where he went, what he was doing. He didn't know where he was, and he likely didn't know how to get back home. Eventually, he would find himself in Wyoming, where he picked up a job for a couple of days working as a dishwasher in exchange for some food. While walking through Wyoming, minding his own business, Joe would be arrested for vagrancy, which is arrested for essentially being homeless. When he was taken to the station, Joe was able to give over his name and tell the officers where he was from, and immediately upon him saying that he was from Pueblo, the sheriff zoned in on him because there had just been this really big unsolved murder case, and that was the case of Dorothy Drain. The sheriff must have decided that he wanted all of the honour and all of the glory of cracking such a huge case that he began to intensely grill and question Joe. During this questioning, Joe wasn't able to give the sheriff an alibi of where he was of the night of the murder. It just so happened that the night of the murder fell in that time where Joe had went missing, and this only fueled the belief and the good feeling that this sheriff had that Joe was involved. Because Joe didn't really understand what was going on, what was happening, what he was essentially being accused of, and he didn't have a solicitor there to help him, he began to just go along with what the sheriff was saying all the way until he gave a complete confession, confessing to murdering Dorothy Drain. He would make several false confessions. He was being fed information, and so every time he gave a confession, there was something that was different. Not once did he say the exact same story twice. But that didn't bother the sheriff. Despite the police in Pueblo having Frank and all of their evidence against him, which was pretty strong evidence, their case only strengthened when Frank made a full confession. Despite this, both of the men would still go to trial for the murder of Dorothy Drain. Frank would be found guilty and was sentenced to death. When it came to Joe's trial, his solicitors tried to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. 3 psychiatrists who looked at Joe determined that he was insane and that he didn't have the capacity to commit such a crime. However, after the sheriff from Wyoming took the stand and the confessions were put into evidence, the jury believed them, and so they convicted Joe of the murder of Dorothy Drain and sentenced him to death. While on death row, many people, prisoners and staff alike, all took a liking to Joe. He was pleasant, joyful, happy, and always had a smile on his face. He had no understanding of where he was and why he was there. The warden, who had a soft spot for Joe, would actually gift him a little windy-up tray, and this was Joe's prized possession. He would sit in his cell happily, joyfully, playing with this tray for hours on end. When his execution was approaching, he was asked what he wanted for his final meal, but again, because he didn't really understand what he was being asked, staff then took it upon themselves to get Joe his favourite ice cream. Joe's execution took place on the 6th of January 1939. He spent some time with his mother, some time playing with his train and eating his ice cream. It was reported that just before being led to his execution, he gave the warden his ice cream and asked the warden to save it for him so that he could have some more later. 23-year-old Joe Arady would be executed via the gas chamber for a crime he didn't commit. In 2011, he would be officially pardoned by the state of Colorado.
She was woken up in the middle of the night by a random man, ripped away from her bed, kidnapped from her own home, and abandoned in a random field. I genuinely cannot think of anything scarier. That being said, I do have to give my usual warning. This video does involve an 8-year-old child. So if you think that listening to this is going to harm your mental health in any way, please skip this video. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in my next one. Love you. Guys, as I just sat down to start filming this video, it just started thundering and storming outside. And honestly, like a little bit spooky, but it kind of fits the theme. In the summer of 1990, a group of kids were outside playing in a field. They were playing tag when one of them tripped on something. They didn't know what they tripped on at first because they couldn't see. It was a field with the tall grass. But once they did, they realized what they tripped on was the body of an 8-year-old little girl fighting for her life. Jennifer Schuett had been lying on that field between 12 to 14 hours before she was found fighting for her life. She had been left severely injured right on top of a fire anthill, and miraculously, she lived to tell her story. 8-year-old Jennifer Schuett lived in Dickinson, Texas in an apartment with her mom Elaine. It was just the two of them, and they had a really close relationship. When Jennifer was little, her mom was the biggest comfort, and her to her mom was the biggest blessing in her life. Elaine loved her mini-me more than anything in this world. In August of 1990, Jennifer was out for summer break. She had just finished second grade at her elementary school. August 9th of 1990 was a Thursday, and it was a common occurrence for Jennifer to sleep with her mom in her room because Jennifer was scared of the dark. But because Elaine needed to wake up early the next morning, she asked Jennifer if she could sleep in her own bed. Jennifer agreed. 8-year-old Jennifer walked to her own bedroom. She read some books for the night until she got sleepy, turned off her light, and went to bed. It was supposed to be a normal night, but it was everything but. Jennifer would soon be woken up, taken, and kidnapped through an open window on her ground floor apartment. Jennifer had fallen asleep peacefully in her own bedroom, in her own bed, and the next thing that she knew, she was in a random man's arms, being carried outside down the sidewalk with her mouth covered by this strange man's hand. That man was 20-year-old Dennis Earl Bradford. He shoved Jennifer in his car and immediately started driving away. He told Jennifer not to worry, said that he was an undercover police officer, and asked her to trust him. Next thing she knew, they were parked in her school parking lot, and Dennis turned around and offered her a piece of candy. And Jennifer, she's 8 years old, and she is so conflicted in her mind because she's been taught two things. One, to always trust police officers, but two, to never take candy from strangers. She's conflicted in her little mind. It's also extremely late at night, and she was awoken in the most abrupt way possible. Next, the man looked at her and told her that her mom would be coming to get her. Suddenly, the car was moving again, and they were driving towards an isolated grassy area. As soon as they got to an off-road gravel road, he turned to Jennifer and completely overpowered her with a weapon in hand, saying things such as, "Am I scaring you, little girl? Am I scaring you?" And then this man's hands were around her throat, and Jennifer was completely dozing off. She was drifting in and out while the man SA'd her. When she finally came back to, she realized they were no longer in the car. They were now outside, and the man was dragging her across a field through her ankles. He dragged her until he reached a fire anthill so she could feel all of the ants crawling all over her body, biting her, stakes poking her in her back. Everything on the ground she could feel scratching her back, but she knew that if she wanted to live, she had to pretend that she was already gone. This is the only way the random man would leave if he thought that she was gone. Jennifer thought if he thought that she was gone, maybe he would just dump her and walk away, so she stayed as still as she could, and the man let go of her ankles. He walked away, she heard his car turn on and drive away. An 8-year-old girl ripped away from her bed, kidnapped from her own home in the middle of her sleep, and completely left and abandoned on a field. As soon as she knew that he was gone, Jennifer tried to scream as loud as she could, but no sound was coming out, and this was confusing to her. She reached her hand up to her neck, and all she could feel was a thick, gooey substance. It was red. She had an injury from ear to ear, and it was so severe the reason why no sound was coming out was because her vocal cords had been separated into two. As she was lying there, she's still going in and out. Her little body is fighting as hard as it can to not give up, and every time that she would come back to and realize what was happening, remember what was happening, she would be shocked that she was still alive. She would drift off, come back to, doze off, come back to, but every single time she would open her eyes and be conscious again, she could not believe that she was still alive. The sun was slowly starting to come up, and Jennifer had been on that field, lying on the ground, fighting for her life for 14 hours until eventually she was found by those kids playing tag on that field. Her last memory before waking up in a hospital bed was a man kneeling down next to her, but that man was a police officer and he was begging her to hang on, reassuring her that everything would be okay. She drifted off, and when she came back to, she had been admitted into hospital and was lying on a hospital bed. She had been admitted to John Seeley Hospital, and because her injuries were so bad, authorities thought the odds of Jennifer making it through the night were slim to none. One of the doctors who treated her has said, quote, "When I first saw Jennifer in the emergency room, she was a fairly small 8-year-old, pale, very pale. She would look at you and you could see, that she was very fearful," end quote. Jennifer had that large wound on her neck. It had pierced through her trachea, but avoided any major blood vessels. Doctors rushed in to insert a tube and create an airway for her to breathe to maximize her chances of fighting through this. They did that while also treating her other injuries, including all of the ant bites that she had that were covering her entire body and the terrible physical trauma that she had suffered from the SA. Jennifer's mom, Elaine, got to the hospital as soon as she got the call, as fast as she could, and she was horrified after realizing the horror that was happening to her little girl. It felt like they were living through a real-life scary movie. Meanwhile, she had to put on a brave face and be there for Jennifer. In the following days, Jennifer continued to stay in hospital as she slowly started to recover from her injuries, but she was having a really hard time trusting her male doctors. She had just experienced the worst thing that she had been through in her life, and everything that was done to her was done by a man who claimed that he was a police officer. She was 8 years old, she didn't know, and in her head, if that man that said was a police officer hurt her, who was to say that these men that were claiming were doctors wouldn't hurt her as well? Years later, Jennifer said, quote, "I was kind of a hard patient to deal with because I had a lot of male doctors and I was scared of males. I remember even kicking one of the male doctors in the stomach because I wanted him away from me. This man that hurt me said he was a police officer and he hurt me very bad. So in my eyes, who's to say that these doctors could be trusted? Everyone was a suspect in my book," end quote. But even at 8 years old, Jennifer Schuett was quick on her feet. Throughout everything that happened to her, she had been able somehow, some way, able to understand the situation that she was in, and she knew whoever this man was should get in trouble for everything he did to her. So in the middle of all the chaos, she tried to memorize information about this man that would later come in handy. When Jennifer was being treated, it was incredibly hard to get her to speak, and it was something they had to work through amongst all the other things. It wasn't only hard because of the damage that had been done to her vocal cords, but also because she was traumatized and had such a strong fear of men. But over time, her mom, along with the lead investigator on the case, who was a woman, began asking questions to Jennifer like, what did he look like? What was he wearing? What did the car look like? And Jennifer would respond by scrambling things down on a little piece of paper. She remembered that the man had greasy hair, a mustache, a scar on his face, and she also was able to remember the color of the car. Most importantly, however, she remembered his name, and she wrote down, quote, "He said his name was Dennis," end quote. 4 days after the attack, with her descriptions and the help of a sketch artist, they came up with a sketch of the perpetrator, and Jennifer confirmed that it did look a lot like him. Because of her memory and the strength that she had shown, there was hope. However, 19 years would pass before law enforcement was finally able to identify and arrest Dennis Earl Bradford. Slowly but surely, Jennifer regained her ability to speak, and once doctors thought she was stable enough and she was safe enough, she was released from hospital and able to return back home to her mom. Physically, she was getting better. Mentally, however, she was exhausted, scared. She never felt safe and lived in a never-ending fear. The community was living in fear as well. By this point, her story had been made public, and it left everyone in the town living in fear because the man that was responsible for doing that to an 8-year-old little girl was still out somewhere walking around as a free man. A year passed, and then 2, and then 3, until Jennifer Schuett graduated high school. She went on to college and eventually secured a full-time job working at a public library. She also met and fell in love with a man, Jonathan Martinez, but throughout it all, in the back of her head, throughout all these years, were always the memories of what happened to her that horrible night in 1990. She has said, quote, "As I got older, I just thought, like, how can all these years have passed and I still do not know who's done this," end quote. 18 years passed, and in 2008, Jennifer Schuett would receive a call that would change everything. The phone rang. She answered. It was a man introducing himself as Tim Cromie. He was calling from the Dickinson Police Department. Her case had landed on his desk and he wanted to meet her in person. Tim Cromie gave Jennifer a sense of hope that she had not felt in a long time. He looked at her and told her, "We are in this together now. We are going to work as hard as we can and do whatever it takes to find you the justice that you deserve, and we will not let this man get away with what he did to you." Tim brought in FBI Special Agent Richard Venison to help with this case, and Jennifer Schuett said this changed everything for her. Seeing that there were members of law enforcement now who were just as determined as her to find this man, it felt like maybe, just maybe, there would be light at the end of the tunnel. The first step was to go back and look at all of the evidence that had been recovered from that abandoned field all those years ago, including items of clothing that were sent off to an FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia. They were hoping to find even a particle of DNA that would help lead them somewhere to test against their system to see if they could find a match. And they did. In 2009, Special Agent Richard Venison's phone rang. It was the lab. They had a match. The DNA on those clothes left behind nearly 2 decades earlier belonged to a man named Dennis Earl Bradford. In 1997, he had served time after being convicted of kidnapping a woman in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Dennis had essayed her, had threatened her with a weapon to her neck, very similar to what happened to Jennifer in 1990. For that, Dennis was sentenced to 12 years, but he only served 3 before walking free. The next part of their investigation was crucial. They needed additional proof to be able to confidently say that Dennis was their guy, because Dennis lived in Arkansas, but remember, Jennifer lived in Texas. So the FBI reached out to the Texas Department of Public Safety to request a picture of Dennis Bradford's old driver's license, and that photo on his license had actually been taken only months before the kidnapping, and when they got that photo back, their jaws were on the floor. The photo looked almost identical to the sketch artist had made all those years ago. And with that, the North Little Rock Police Department in Arkansas pulled Dennis over the first chance they got for a traffic violation. They stopped him, arrested him, and brought him in for questioning. And finally, 19 years later, Dennis would be held accountable for the horrific crimes he committed against 8-year-old Jennifer Schuett. At the time of his arrest, Dennis Bradford was married. He had 3 stepchildren, was working as a welder, and had been keeping the biggest secret of his life for the past 19 years. When Jennifer got the call that they found her kidnapper, she could not believe it. She has said, quote, "This was a person that I had wanted to find for almost 20 years at that point, and I was so scared that it was someone that I knew, and thank goodness it wasn't. It was just one of those true stranger abductions, and thank God for that," end quote. Dennis Earl Bradford was in the interview room when he was asked if he had ever heard of Jennifer Schuett. He says yes, and they say, "Tell us about that," and he says no. And remember, 19 years had passed. Dennis was fully convinced that that night he had ended Jennifer's life. There was not a question in his mind that she could possibly still be alive. And although her story was everywhere on the news, she was only 8 years old. She was only a child. I don't think they released her name, and the details of her investigation were also not released to the public. He also lived in a completely different state, so Dennis had no reason to believe or suspect that she was still alive. He was not worried one bit about Jennifer Schuett because in his mind, she was gone. So sitting in the interview room, authorities tell officers that they have done their homework, and Dennis immediately tears up. He tears up, looks at them and says, quote, "Not a single day goes by where I don't see that baby. There is no other side to the story. She was innocent and I was a sick, deranged little punk." Officers tell him, quote, "Well, I think if you were to see her, I think you would be extremely proud. I really do," end quote. And Dennis is in shock. He starts sobbing, saying, "She's alive, she's alive, she's alive," end quote. You guys need to look up that interview right now. I don't even know how to describe it. He confesses. He says he has no idea why he did what he did. He says, quote, "I walked over to the window. I remember it was open and I could see in it and the light was on, and I just want this to be over. I'm sick and tired of looking over my shoulder and being so afraid. So forgive me, Mom. I pulled that little girl out of that window. I put her in my car. She was freaking out and I told her, 'Don't worry, it's all right.' I told that little girl that I was a police officer, that everything was going to be okay, and I pulled off onto this little road, and that little girl, she was so scared. I just lost it. I was like a savaged animal. I couldn't force myself to say it, and I can't force myself to say it now. I took that little girl out of there, and I I don't know why. I've never known why. Many times I've wanted to end it, but I just never had the guts, end quote. Dennis Bradford was taken to Galveston County Jail to await trial. Meanwhile, Jennifer began prepping for trial and writing her victim impact statement. She was getting ready to testify against him. But Jennifer Schuett would never be able to face him in court because in May of 2010, Dennis unalived himself in his prison cell. Tim Cromie was the one to give Jennifer the news, and describing that night, she has said, quote, "The only thing I can describe is devastation. I felt like everything that I had worked so hard for was just ripped away from me in an instant," end quote. Jennifer Schuett made the decision that she was going to get the last word one way or another. She wanted the closure that she had been looking for and fighting for this whole time, so she decided that she was going to go to his grave and read her victim impact statement to him anyway. Part of her statement read, quote, "I have waited for this day for 20 years of my life and hope now you feel as weak as you made me feel all those years ago as a child. While you played out your fantasy on my tiny body and attacked me, you made me feel this small. Today, I hope you feel this small sitting in front of me because I definitely feel like the strong one." In life, we all have choices, and I made a choice early on to not let this negative and traumatic experience define me. Instead, I turned the attack into something positive, not only for myself, but others by using my voice to speak out against crime in hopes that myself and other survivors will conquer crime one voice at a time, end quote. And as this gives me goosebumps every time, as Jennifer was sitting there by the grave with her husband reading her statement to Dennis's grave, she paused, she turned over, looked at her husband and said, "I wonder if he's hearing me." And just then, a single fire ant bit her on the leg. Jennifer Schuett took that as a sign that Dennis heard her loud and clear. I literally have goosebumps. Unbelievable story, and I cannot begin to explain how happy it makes me that she's still here today. Anyway, that is all I have for today's video. Thank you guys for spending time with me today and for listening to Jennifer's story. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
Did Karen Reid hit her boyfriend with her car and then leave him to die in the cold? Or has she been framed by the police? This is a case that has so many twists and turns, more questions than answers, and it is still ongoing right now. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of John O'Keefe. In 2004, both Karen Reid and John O'Keefe had just graduated from university. Karen had graduated with 2 degrees in finance and John with a degree in criminal justice. The two would unexpectedly cross paths at a house party that they were both attending, and upon seeing each other, there was an initial attraction. They would exchange phone numbers and got to talking, and quickly they began dating. Their relationship was relatively short-lived, however, as Karen had to relocate to Dublin Island for her job. By 2020, Karen was back in the US living in Mansfield, Massachusetts, where she worked 2 jobs. Her day job was within the finance sector and she was pretty high up in the company, and her other job was that she would actually teach students finance at a nearby university. One day in 2020, she would receive the most random Facebook message, and it was from John saying, quote, "Hey, blast from the past, how's things?" Since moving to Ireland, a lot had changed in Karen's life. She had been married but had no children, she was separated or divorced from her husband, and she had struggled with her health as well. She had been diagnosed with Crohn's disease and multiple sclerosis. But a lot had changed for John as well. He had been working as a Boston patrol officer and was raising 2 young children. These children weren't his, however. John's sister and her husband very sadly died in quick succession, and John took on his niece and nephew, officially becoming their guardian, and he thought the absolute world of them. He stepped down from his patrol officer role, swapping out car chases and standoffs for a job behind a desk. He did this because he thought that it was much safer, and he didn't want to put himself in a position where his life could be in danger and leaving his niece and nephew behind, losing yet another parental figure. After sending the Facebook message, Karen and John continued to talk, and immediately they began to bond again, and the spark that they had over a decade ago was reignited. Karen started to spend more time at John's house with John and the children, who she took a fondness to, a real liking to them. She would help look after them, help them with their online schoolwork. Again, this is in 2020, so all of that was going on over Zoom, alongside helping John look after the house. Things seemed great between the couple until they weren't. Karen and John could sometimes get into pretty vicious and fiery arguments. One key piece of evidence within this case is a voicemail that Karen had left John, where she is screaming down the phone to him. It is very distressing to listen to. She alleged that John would go out drinking and would stay out until the early hours of the morning, leaving her behind at home with the children, which at first she didn't mind because she did really like them, but then it started to become expected and she felt pressure from that. There was also accusations of cheating. On the 28th of January 2022, Karen, John and a couple of their friends, which like John were Boston police officers, all went out drinking together in Canton, Massachusetts. Karen said that she had around about 8 cocktails. As the night was getting on and as bars started to close, one of the men within the group offered everyone to come back to his house for afters. Karen and John would get into a car together, and that is the last thing that happened that we know for certain. From here, it is a mystery. We really don't know what happened, unless of course you know which side you believe. It is alleged by the prosecution that Karen, who was incredibly drunk, drove herself and John over to this man's house, but they must have had some sort of bicker on the way there. When John jumped out of the car, Karen pulled the gear stick into reverse and slammed her foot on the accelerator and hit John with her car before speeding away, leaving him alone outside with fatal injuries. He was unconscious and bleeding in the snow. The weather that night was bitterly cold. It got down to minus 11 degrees, and over the night around about 20 inches of snow fell. Not the type of conditions to even be outside, never mind outside and injured. A couple of hours later, now in the very early morning, Karen and 2 of her friends would go searching for John and would discover his body in the snow. Some people at the scene remember Karen being hysterical and screaming, quote, "I hit him, seemingly making an admission. She, however, would completely refute that story. Karen claims that she dropped John off that night and did not hit him with her car. She went out with her friends looking for him hours later, and when she discovered him, she was hysterical. She was hyperventilating. She tried giving him mouth to revive him. When explaining how John ended up in the snow, Karen's team alleged that an altercation happened inside of the house, that these were all Boston police officers and there was many secrets between them all. That something must have happened, resulting in John getting beaten and then being left outside in the snow to die. And that because they're all a group of police officers, they are being protected, and all of this is being pinned on Karen. The day after the discovery of John O'Keefe's body, Karen Reid would be arrested on multiple charges, including murder. Her bail was set at $80,000, which was paid by her parents, and right now she is going through her second trial. Her first trial happened last year, and that ended in a hung jury. They couldn't decide if she was guilty or innocent. I have been very loosely following this case, and there are so many details that I couldn't fit into this video because the TikTok would be like 3 hours long. There is so much. Some details where I think, oh my god, she did it, she hit him with that car. But then there's others where I think, how on earth is this woman being accused? I don't know which way the trial is going to go, although I do think that there is reasonable doubt. Comment down below and let me know what you think. Let me know your opinions on this case, what you think happened. And if you want to hear a really in-depth deep dive of this case, I would definitely recommend the Crime Junkie podcast. They did a really great episode that isn't too long, which really ties a lot of things up.
This is the story of Latonia and Shaquan Bellamy. April 4th, 2010, Latonia and her friend Darmelia Lawrence were at Shaquan's house. Shaquan and Latonia Bellamy are cousins. Shaquan took a shotgun and a pistol out of the closet, and when Latonia seen it, she said, "I've always wanted to shoot a gun." So Shaquan handed her the pistol and the 3 left the house. As they were walking down Randolph Avenue in Jersey City, they seen a couple unloading gifts out of their car. That's when Shaquan looked at his cousin and said, "That's the couple we're going to get." The couple was 27-year-old Michael Machowski and 25-year-old Nia Hack. The 2 were celebrating their engagement that night, and they were just getting home from the party. Shaquan told the couple to get on the ground, and he immediately shot Michael in the back of the head with the shotgun. That's when he looked at his cousin and said, "You said you want to shoot a gun, so shoot the fucking gun." That's when Latonia shot Nia in the back of the head. The 3 took the couple's gifts and fled. Now, they tried to steal their car, but the couple had their steering wheel locked, so they had to escape on foot. 2 days later, the police picked up Shaquan for questioning just because he's a well-known menace. When they picked him up, they found drugs on him, which violated his probation. they held him on $1 million bond. Now, while in custody, they took his cell phone, and that led them to Latonia and Darmelia. They also put a warrant out for Darmelia's brother, who was charged with an execution-style shooting just earlier that year. But he ended up turning himself in. He said, "Hey, I don't got nothing to do with this shooting. I already got enough on my plate. Do y'all need me to take a lie detector test, whatever y'all need me to do? I ain't had nothing to do with this." Darmelia even told the investigators that her brother was at home during the time of the murders, and she stuck beside him. She said he didn't have nothing to do with it. These two were picked up April 9th, 2010. During interrogation, Latonia is pleading not guilty. She admitted to saying that she always wanted to shoot a gun, and she admitted to carrying the pistol. But she said she did not shoot Nia in the back of the head. She said she shot the gun once in the air and once to the ground, but away from the victim. These two are also being held on $1 million each bond until the trial. I don't know if I mentioned, but all three of them are only 19 years old. And both women said that they will testify against Shaquan. Now, during the trial, which started June of 2012, Latonia said that she feared for her life. She was afraid her cousin Shaquan was going to kill her if she didn't comply. She said she would have ran if she could. She only took the $40 from the robbery so her cousin wouldn't think that she was going to go to the police on him. Sticking to her story that she shot away from the victim, but the police played a tape in the courtroom from one of her interviews saying that she might have struck the victim when she shot to the ground. Latonia's sentencing got rescheduled to February of 2013. Now, I didn't see nothing to where Darmelia went against her, but I guess that still didn't matter because she still got sentenced to life plus 30 years. But this motherfucker here, Shaquan was charged and convicted of killing Nia and Michael plus 3 other people. All of this within a 2-month span. And Darmelia, she pled guilty for the robberies of not only Michael and Nia, but the 3 people that Shaquan killed. This whole group, oh my God. Shaquan Bellamy was sentenced to 146 years for the 5 homicides. Latonia Bellamy was sentenced to life plus 30 years for her role in the murders. And Darmelia Lawrence was sentenced to 20 years for the robbery. There was no evidence that she had ever killed anybody. But last year, 2024, Latonia got resentenced. Her sentence was reduced to 70 years because she filed an appeal and won. But is that really a win? But Yellow Tape, do y'all believe Latonia? Or do y'all think Shaquan committed both of those murders by itself?
How does a missing little girl end up butchered in an abandoned building? Her name was Kaimani and she was 13 years old, living with her grandmother Dorothy. But one morning, Dorothy came home to her front door wide open. She rushed inside but found the house completely ransacked. Kaimani's PJs and glasses were scattered on the floor like someone had violently broken in. But Kaimani was nowhere to be found. Dorothy panicked, so she calls 911 to report her missing, and for 6 days they searched and searched, but they couldn't find her anywhere until Kaimani's body was finally discovered on the 2nd floor of an abandoned, burned down building miles from her home. She was found tied up with rope. Her hands had been completely chopped off and her head was nearly decapitated. This world is honestly too cruel for children like her. Autopsy revealed she died from multiple deep slashes to her neck. She had been brutally assaulted and discarded like trash in that building. And the monster who did this, her own father, 33-year-old Darnell Jones, on the very day Kaimani went missing, he went on live television pretending to be concerned, claiming that she called him because she was too scared to be home alone. He said that he picked her up, but he swore he dropped her off back home that same day. But when police questioned him about her whereabouts, his story kept changing. And when they went to go arrest him, he pulled out a gun and opened fire. They immediately shot back, but thankfully none of the officers were hurt. Well, he was, but that's what he deserves. But Kaimani, she was innocent. She did not deserve to die. She was just days away from her 14th birthday. She never got to blow those candles out because her own father cut her life short. That's up.
This is the story of Brian Nichols. September 4th, 2004, Brian hears through the grapevine that his ex-girlfriend of 8 years started dating the minister from their church. This pissed Brian off to the point where he showed up at his ex's house. When she opened the door and noticed that it was him, he forced his way in. He bound her with duct tape at gunpoint and sexually assaulted her. He was quickly arrested for this crime, and he was charged with SA, aggravated assault, burglary, possession of a firearm, false imprisonment. He was facing life if he was convicted. Now, the first trial ended in a mistrial with a hung jury. Brian told everybody in the courtroom, "I'm not going to go lying down," when he learned that he will be retried. Brian's friends warned the DA office that he might try to escape, and another one of his friends told the prosecutors that Brian is planning to escape. He actually told one of his friends to leave a credit card in the suit pocket that he had planned to wear to court. Even Brian's mother emailed the Fulton County Sheriff's Office to let them know, "Hey, my son just might take one of y'all officers' weapons, so y'all might want to be on alert." The retrial started that next week. While transporting Brian from the courtroom back to his cell, the officer noticed that it was something in his shoe. It turned out to be 2 sharp shanks made from door hinges. This prompted the judge to be like, "Hey, I'm going to need some extra security on his trial that's supposed to start that Friday." March 11th, 2005, Sheriff Deputy Cynthia Hall was assigned to guard Brian during his trial. She was taking him to change from jail clothes to civilian clothes. And on her way taking him, another deputy was like, "Hey girl, you need to take some backup with you." But Cynthia said, "No, I got him." When they got to the changing room, as soon as Cynthia freed Brian from his handcuffs, he beat her so bad that the hospital thought that she was shot in the face. He then picked up her keys and locked her in the cell. He took her gun and changed his clothes, and he headed straight for the judge's chamber. But when he got there, the judge was not there. But that didn't stop him. Brian entered a courtroom door that was behind the judge's bench, where Judge Barnes was in there handling a civil case. He shot him point blank in the back of the head. He'd never seen it coming. And before fleeing, he shot the court reporter, Julie Brandu. Brian exited the courtroom and ran to an emergency exit stairwell, and that's where he ran into Officer Holt, who was responding to the alarms. The two ran down 7 flights of stairs. When Brian exited the emergency doors, he triggered another alarm. And right before he was about to run across Martin Luther King Drive, he turned around and shot Officer Holt 2 times and continued on foot. Brian ran into an underground parking garage that was located across the street from the courthouse. Now, during his whole escape, he hijacked 5 or more cars. The city of Atlanta was on shutdown. It was a $65,000 reward on his head. Now, at around 10 p.m. that night, Brian tried to kidnap a young lady in Buckhead who was walking home from the gym. He held her at gunpoint and told her he needed to use her apartment to hide out. But when they got back to the apartment, the girl's boyfriend was there, and him and Brian started to tussle. And while they tussling, the young lady was calling 911. And when Brian heard that, he fled. At around 2 a.m., now March 12th, Brian ended up in Duluth, Georgia, where he approached Ashley Smith in Bridgewater Apartments. He held her at gunpoint and forced her into her apartment. Once inside, he tied Ashley up with electrical cords and duct tape while he showered. He spent several hours at her apartment. The two even started confiding in each other. He asked Ashley for some weed, and she said, "All I got is meth." And Brian said, "I'll take it." He then asked her to help him move the latest car he hijacked from the apartments, and she agreed. Once they got back to the apartments from moving the car, she cooked Brian some breakfast. After breakfast, she read him the Bible. Then she asked Brian, "Can I please go see my daughter? I was scheduled to see her today." And he agreed. At around 9:50 a.m., Ashley called 911. Brian surrendered with no fight. During interrogation, he told the investigators that he felt like a soldier on a mission. He was very upfront and detailed with his confession, so much so that the investigator said that it was one of the easiest interviews he had ever did. On December 13th, 2008, Brian Nichols was sentenced to multiple life sentence with no chance of parole. He was spared the death penalty because the jury could not come to a unanimous decision. The first sheriff, Cynthia Hall, she ended up surviving. Her face was just fucked up. And Ashley Smith, the lady he held hostage, ended up getting about $100K for turning him in. But Cynthia Hall, all this could have been avoided if you just would have took a couple more officers down there with you.
There's a really strange missing persons case happening right now out of Utah. Let's talk about it. This is 21-year-old Elizabeth Green. She was last seen walking to work along a dirt road in Callio, Utah, which is an extremely remote area in northern Snake Valley. Like, there really isn't much out there, and the area she went missing is roughly 3 hours from any major city. Elizabeth had just started a new job at a remote ranch, and she was walking there that day, but never made it, and it's almost like she vanished into thin air. She was reported missing to the police later that day, and they began looking for her right away. Authorities have searched the area around her home and the ranch that she was going to work at, including the route that she would have taken to get there, but no trace of Elizabeth has been found. Police searched the ranch, which has not been publicly named, just one day after Elizabeth was reported missing, but according to them, they didn't find anything suspicious. The rancher said that she never made it to the ranch that day and that he had no contact with her, so it's left authorities wondering what truly happened to her that day. Police have tried pinging her phone, but they aren't able to get a connection, and they've searched all of her electronic devices, but they've all turned up nothing. There's been no activity on her social media accounts since that day either. Her mom thinks that Elizabeth could have possibly been picked up that day, but she just doesn't know by who. There's also a possibility that she arranged to have someone pick her up, but they didn't show, which could have led to Elizabeth trying to walk through the remote desert by herself. According to her family, she does suffer from some mental health issues and has ran away before, but no matter what, she's always stayed in contact with her family and she's always come back within a day. She would never just up and leave like this. Just based on the circumstances, police believe that she's in immediate danger. Like I mentioned before, Callio is extremely remote and so far away from any major city, so the fact that she just mysteriously disappeared and left behind no trace in a matter of hours is just terrifying. It's now been over a month and Elizabeth is still missing. With the summer weather coming up, we need to find out what really happened to her that day. These are some of her characteristics and what she was last seen wearing. If you have any information about this case, please contact the number on the screen.